Alright, welcome to the video. This is going to be a video about the basic fishing line types. Hope you enjoy. Hello. Well, I've been meaning to make this video for a while, and this is for beginner fishermen who are just looking into putting on a different type of line and are utterly confused by the hundreds of different lines in the store. If you go on the Bass Pro Shops, you will see literally a wall of fishing line there. And you may wonder, okay, isn't there just one type that just goes straight down on poundage for different types of fish? Well, that's because fishing line is mostly built for certain aspects. And there are roughly about 3 categories of main fishing line that you'll find. You get monofilament, fluorocarbon, and braid. And there's a few other types of newer super lines that have come out that are meant to be all-in-one fishing lines, but you kind of got to test them out to know what you're talking about. But I'll go over the basics of what each type of line has and what are the advantages and disadvantages. And I will go into more in depth about these fishing lines in later videos. So let's get started. First off, you got monofilament. Monofilament is the most common and cheapest type of fishing line that you'll find. Monofilament is usually a single strand type of line. It'll come in many colors, and many brands usually have monofilament as one of their baseline products. This is 4-pound monofilament. I use this typically for ice fishing. And some of the aspects of this are that it is stretchy when it gets pulled on, which makes it very impact resistant for if you're using heavier lures like heavy jigs or bottom bouncer rigs that you want to be able to take an impact if, like, say you're using a bait caster and it backlashes on you and the line snaps tight. This will take a little bit of the impact. But that's about the only thing that's good with monofilament. It has horrible line memory, which if you want to know about line memory, think about it like this. You wind fishing line around your finger, and you want it to be able to wrap around there without any tension, and you see it just kind of popped off there if you can see that. But what line memory does is it makes it crooked. You see it should be going straight at that, but just that little bit of movement made it crooked. And see, there it straightens out again. The problem with this is if you use older fishing line, it will rat nest on you really quick, meaning it'll loop and tie in the big old ball of fishing line that you can waste the entire spool of fishing line on there and spend hours getting it out of your line. So that's about the only aspects of this that are good. The strength is not anywhere amazing. I'm using this fishing line as a base for most of my videos. A baseline to measure other lines upon. Again, the only advantages of this is that it's impact resistant and it's cheap. And one other aspect that will be mentioned in the other lines is abrasion resistance, which this is moderate in. It's nothing amazing, but it'll take a little bit of abrasion. So that's monofilament. Next is fluorocarbon. Now this is one of the fishing lines that's rather hard to find, though it is also along the expensive end. This fluorocarbon is roughly on just a little bit stronger than monofilament in strength. It usually only comes in one color, and that is clear. That makes it a fairly low vis line that can be used in about any situation. A lot of people like to use these for ice fishing and for leader line, which I will go into later as a type of rigging that you use on your main line. But the thing is, fluorocarbon has 0 line memory. Unlike Monofilament, which has a very bad line memory. Fluorocarbon, if I wrap it around my finger, goes straight back to straight. It is springy, which is one downfall of this. You never want to spool your entire rod with fluorocarbon, or your line is literally going to jump off the spool. And that's not very much fun. But one nice thing is it's super clear. And one of the selling points of this as a leader line is that it's abrasion resistant. It is probably the most abrasion resistant line on the market. If I'll use these on northern pike, which have very sharp teeth and rip out tons of lures, they'll tear up my lures like nothing else and break your line in a second. This fluorocarbon is able to take up to fairly standard pike. This is 8-pound fluorocarbon. I use it on most of my leaders for bass and northern pike and other toothy fish. I've never had one break off unless it's absolutely monster fish like a muskie or something. Or a bass that will pull the line so hard it snaps it. And one other thing about this, since it is so springy, it's almost impossible to tie except for with specialized knots, like the polymer knot, which I will show in a later video to show the strength. But other than that, that's fluorocarbon. It's a very good leader line to have at the end of your line if you have a high visual line. So next and finally for this video, we have braid. I'm using Power Pro braid because it's a very basic braid. It's one of the braids I mainly use. It's one of the cheaper braids out there. And it shows very well what a braid is. It is literally polymer lines braided together. One thing, for strength, nothing can beat braided line in a straight tug of war. I've pulled my boat upwind with this. And this is not insanely strong line. It's 10-pound line. The diameter is super small. One problem with it is that it is high visual, meaning that if the water is clear, the fish will spook at braided line. One other disadvantage of braided line, it is not shock resistant. Muskie fishermen usually don't like braided line unless it's in the above 80-pound braided line. Because if you're using a heavier lure like a jig or a giant crankbait for muskie, and your line goes taut all of a sudden, it can snap very easily. So that's about the two main problems with this. It is also about the same price as fluorocarbon in price range. Nice thing about this, you can have this on your rod for about 5 years, I've noticed. Because I still have some braid on my rod that's over 5 years old, and it's just starting to get to the degraded point where I want to buy a new spool of it. And nice thing about this, it usually comes in various colors. I prefer just nice green because it matches the watercolor around here. And it's one of my favorite go-to lines to spool on your rod. But if you're in clear water, it will spook fish. Now, to go on to rigs. You heard me say that fluorocarbon is a good leader line. What I mean by that is I gotta go into what I'm talking about on my main rod. My main rod, I will have, even if it comes with monofilament on it, that's what usually store rods will come on with on the spool when you buy them, is they'll have some sort of cheap monofilament line. It will be the worst line you can ever have. Immediately get that off. But usually I have braided line for my main line, which means I spool the whole rod in braided line, except for about the end 6 feet of line. The end 6 feet, I will either use monofilament or braid. If I'm going, say, bass fishing on topwater with a bait caster, I'll use monofilament on my leader line because it's shock absorbent. So if I'm using a plug, casting out with a bait caster and it snaps, it won't snap the braid. And I see my monofilament is it holds a knot a lot better than fluorocarbon. But say I'm fishing around rocks or anything, braid is not abrasion resistant. It's probably the least abrasion resistant of all the lines. It will fray and then just sort of goes downhill from there. So if I'm fishing around rocks or for toothy fish like pike or muskie, I'll have a leader line of fluorocarbon, which if I'm fishing around that, I'll usually use 6 to 10 foot of leader line of fluorocarbon, depending on the length of my rod, of course, because I don't want the fluorocarbon being spooled onto the reel. But that's the basics of fishing line for you. And tune in the next, next week and a half, or 2 weeks from now. And you'll get to see, I will do my first video on going in depth on monofilament. So, hope you tune in for that. Please subscribe and like for more. All right, bye.